First of all, if you truly want to understand who the Knights of Malta are, and why some believe they act as secret agents of the Vatican, subscribe to the channel now, because in this video we will travel through 1,000 years of silence, faith, and conspiracy. And let's start from the beginning. Long before becoming diplomats with official passports, the Knights of Malta were born amid the sacred dust of the Crusades. Officially, they were monks, men devoted to caring for the sick and Christian pilgrims in Jerusalem. But behind the veil of charity, there was another calling: holy war. When blood flowed across the stones of the Holy Land, the monks of the Hospital of St. John turned their cloisters into fortresses. The order organized itself as a religious militia, pledging loyalty to the Pope. Thus was born the Order of the Hospitallers. They fought side by side with the Crusaders, but with a key difference. They were trained, disciplined, and acted independently. Their vows of chastity and poverty coexisted with heavy armor and sharpened swords. They were soldier monks, and for many, this union between faith and violence was the embryo of something far greater and more obscure than any crusade could have foreseen. As time went on, the order began building fortresses in strategic points across the Mediterranean. Each base was not just a military bastion, but also a hub for information gathering, trade routes, and religious influence. With the fall of the Crusader kingdoms, they didn't disappear. They merely retreated, reshaped themselves, and awaited the next stage of history. And that stage, not by chance, would be an island marked by blood, fire, and resistance. Malta. There, the knights would reinvent themselves, and their true influence would begin to take form. But that transformation wasn't just geographical, it was political. After the loss of the Holy Land, the knights wandered through Cyprus and then Rhodes until they were expelled once again. It was then, in 1530, that Emperor Charles V offered the island of Malta as a refuge. But what seemed at first to be a modest concession soon proved to be strategic. The knights transformed Malta into a colossal fortress. They built impenetrable walls, naval arsenals, and hospitals that resembled military barracks. The island became a forward post against the Ottoman advance, but also a territory where they could act with almost total autonomy, far from the eyes of continental Europe. Their peak came in 1565, during the Great Siege. Over 40,000 Ottoman soldiers surrounded Malta. On the other side, only about 7,000 defenders, mostly knights and mercenaries. Against all odds, the knights resisted, and they won. This feat earned them not only prestige, but also long-lasting political and religious influence. It was there that the public image of the order was immortalized as bastions of the Christian faith. But internally, something had changed. The war had proven their utility to the West, and along with victory, the knights gained something more dangerous: the respect of kingdoms, and respect opens doors. Over the years, Malta became much more than a military base. It became a diplomatic hub, a bridge between Rome's spiritual power and Europe's geopolitical interests. The knights began to negotiate with ambassadors, monarchs, and bankers. The swords were still there, but the real power no longer resided in steel. It was in the whispered words of closed-door meetings. It was in this way that the order began to shape itself for what would come next. A sovereign entity, without active armies, but with invisible reach. And when they lost Malta, They did not lose their influence. They merely hid it. In 1798, when Napoleon invaded Malta during his campaign to Egypt, the Knights, forbidden by religious vow to fight other Christians, were forced to abandon the island without resistance. It was the end of their territory, but not of their existence. Those who believed the Order of Malta had vanished underestimated the depth of its connections. Instead of collapsing, it adapted. Without land, it reinvented itself as a borderless state. Within a few years, it re-emerged in Rome, maintaining its structure, its hierarchy, and, perhaps most importantly, its sovereignty recognized by the Vatican and other states. From that moment on, the Knights of Malta began to operate with a new kind of power. They created their own passports, stamps, symbolic currency, and maintained diplomatic relations with dozens of countries. The order, although lacking territory, began to function as a sovereign Catholic state. Welcomed into diplomatic circles, invited to international summits, present in conflict regions with a silent authority. Officially, their mission remained the same: humanitarian aid. But between the lines, their role seemed to gain new layers, more subtle, more effective, and according to some, more hidden. As the order gained diplomatic status and recognition in global forums, new questions began to arise. Why would a religious organization need so many diplomatic channels? Why were influential members of politics and the European elite admitted with such secrecy? And why, despite its benevolent mission, did the order act with the discretion typical of an intelligence agency? The answers weren't found in official documents. They were in the connections, in the doors that opened, in the regions where their presence was accepted without fanfare. It was the metamorphosis of warrior monks into invisible diplomats. With permanent observer status at the UN, diplomatic relations with over 100 countries, and operations in conflict zones around the world, the Knights of Malta began to be noticed not only for their humanitarian actions, but for their strategic presence in sensitive areas. In regions where the Vatican could not officially act, due to religious, political, or security reasons, the order was naturally present. Doctors, volunteers, but also diplomats, advisors, and emissaries. Was this activity mere benevolence? Or was there an invisible mechanism behind so many white flags? During the Cold War, the Order's presence in countries divided between the West and the Soviet bloc drew the attention of independent researchers. Some documents suggest discreet meetings between members of the Order and Western intelligence agents. On missions in Lebanon, Nicaragua, and even in parts of Central Africa, the Knights were present where few others could operate. And this raises a crucial question. Why do so many doors open so easily for an organization that, in theory, has no army, no territory, and no direct economic influence? Some scholars have gone so far as to describe the Knights of Malta as a kind of parallel Catholic diplomacy network. Not spies in the classic sense, but trusted operatives. People capable of delivering messages, negotiating agreements, and mediating conversations that required total discretion. Unofficial ambassadors of a faith that needed to move cautiously among fragile alliances and hostile regimes. And in this context, the inevitable question echoes: were the Knights serving only charity, or something much greater? Looking at their actions in the 20th century, it's hard to ignore the pattern. Conflict zones, silent operations, unrestricted access, diplomatic immunity, and a constant presence in international organizations. This set of factors cannot be reduced to coincidence, much less to tradition. We are talking about an order that, without firing a single arrow, conquered the most discreet corridors of power. And perhaps it is precisely in this diplomatic shadow that the Knights of Malta found their new battlefield. Behind the scenes of Italian politics in the 1970s and 80s, one name began to surface with unsettling frequency: Propaganda Due, or simply Lodge P2. Officially, it was a Masonic lodge. In practice, it functioned as a covert center of influence, with ramifications in Parliament, the armed forces, the media, and even the Vatican. When the list of members was discovered, the scandal shook Italy. Among bankers, generals, and politicians, some names had more in common than just P2 membership. They were also Knights of Malta. The coincidence was far too uncomfortable to ignore. Journalist Kevin Dowling investigated these connections and revealed a scenario where political, financial, and religious interests seemed entangled by invisible threads. The presence of Knights of Malta in P2 indicated, at the very least, a tolerance for dual affiliation. But for conspiracy theorists, that tolerance was more than political. It was strategic. Could the Knights be a link between the Vatican and an ideological control network disguised beneath rituals and formal dinners? The answer may never officially come to light, but the pieces on the board suggest a game in motion, far from the public eye. Over time, many of these connections were suppressed. Reports vanished. Cases expired. But the symbols remained. The Maltese cross, which was meant to represent only faith and aid, began to carry for some the weight of silent conspiracies. And amid this haze of dubious alliances, a new chapter emerges, perhaps the most controversial of all. A chapter involving the escape of war criminals, clandestine routes, and a word that still sends chills down historians' spines: ratline. At the end of World War II, thousands of officers, collaborators, and scientists linked to the Nazi regime mysteriously disappeared. Decades later, documents began to reveal the existence of a clandestine scheme nicknamed the Rat Line, a secret network that facilitated the escape of high-ranking figures to distant destinations such as Argentina, Brazil, and Syria. What few know is that, according to independent investigations, this network counted on the silent collaboration of religious sectors. And among the names cited, one arises with unsettling frequency: the Sovereign Order of the Knights of Malta. Researchers like John Loftus and Mark Aarons claim that some fugitives received documents issued by the order itself: passports, transit authorizations, even records of humanitarian protection. Of course, none of this appears in official archives, but by cross-referencing dates, destinations, and testimonies, too many coincidences emerge to be ignored. The justification used by some clergy at the time was simple: to save brilliant minds from communist destruction. But how far does redemption go when it involves crimes against humanity? And who decides that a fugitive deserves a second chance on another continent? None of this is spoken openly, nor is it admitted. But the traces are there, like shadows cast across the floor of a ruined cathedral. The Order of Malta, with its diplomatic access, immunity, and international presence, could it have offered logistical support? Or was its structure used by third parties without direct consent? The Vatican has never confirmed, the Order denied. But the doubt remains etched in history and in the eyes of those who prefer to see beyond the official documents. The trail is silent, but for those who follow its curves, the path still pulses. Today, the Knights of Malta no longer wear shining armor or wield swords on battlefields, but the power they exercise is, in some ways, even more penetrating. The Order holds observer status at the UN, participates in multilateral meetings, and maintains over 100 embassies around the world. What is striking is not their presence, but their subtle influence. Their representatives attend conferences on health, food security, and humanitarian diplomacy. But when observed more closely, a pattern emerges. Doors open easily where others face bureaucracy. In times where transparency is a valuable currency, the Knights of Malta follow the opposite path. They operate discreetly, wear silence as armor. Faith continues to be their official banner, but for more attentive scholars, the Order's current structure functions as a parallel influence network. Are they merely fulfilling their spiritual mission, or have they become agents of greater interests, beyond nations, responding only to the ancestral echo of a vow made before the altar? And the shadows? The answer may lie in the reflection of their emblem, which shines in halls we will never see. The Order's composition has also changed over time. European nobles, former generals, international bankers, discreet aristocrats, men, and now women, with influential pasts and silent political connections. They are admitted through almost medieval ceremonies, but what they do afterward is rarely disclosed. Many engage in legitimate missions, assisting war victims and coordinating mobile hospitals. But there are members who simply do not appear in public records, do not give interviews, do not appear in photographs. They are respectable ghosts of an institution that prizes invisibility as a virtue. The Order of the Knights of Malta has survived empires, revolutions, wars, and schisms. It adapted to each era with the elegance of those who understand the true game of power, to endure. Today, their battlefields are offices, conferences, and private rooms. Their weapons are silence, diplomacy, and historical prestige. But the question that hangs over their existence remains unsettling. Are they merely relics of a glorious past, or active pieces in a mechanism that operates in the present, driven by invisible interests? The answer is not found in their members' biographies, nor in public speeches. It is found behind the scenes, in places where no camera enters, where oaths are still whispered, and where the past was not abandoned, only redesigned. Warriors of faith, without a doubt. But faith is not incompatible with strategy. Spirituality, when allied with structure and secrecy, becomes a tool of formidable reach. And perhaps, at the center of this equation, lies the Order of Malta, a living relic, operating under the appearance of tradition while silently moving pieces on the board of reality. Do you believe the Knights of Malta act solely as agents of charity? Or is there, behind the shield and the cross, a mission that has never been fully revealed? Leave your comment below. Your opinion is part of the investigation. And if this content sparked your curiosity, like the video, share it, and subscribe to the Vaticano Occulto channel. Here, questions are not ignored. They are explored. Because when faith meets power, truth often chooses to remain in silence.